Welcome to our 49th podcast. Today we'll be talking about mourning the past to unlock the future. What's one thing you could do now to ensure your change participants don't get stuck before they even get started? Keep listening to find out.
Welcome to Harmonious Workplaces, a podcast about corporate culture, organizational change management, and workplace behavior. Harmonious Workplaces was started by independent consultants Rich Cruz, Ben Kleinman, and Cheryl Volpe to explore, challenge, and build on various organizational culture and change management concepts. It's a blend of theory and practice based on their personal and professional experiences working with companies of all sizes across various industries. If you own a business, lead a team, want new ideas about the corporate environment, or just want to listen to a group of consultants talking about how to make work more enjoyable, we invite you to sit back, relax, and dive in with us to Harmonious Workplaces.
Hello, Harmonious Workplaces listeners. I'm Rich Cruz. I'm here with Cheryl Volpe, the one and only Cheryl Volpe, in person, our first time meeting in person. And we're joined here, of course, by Ben Kleinman. Hey, Ben.
Hey, everyone. That is so cool. I'm so happy for you guys.
We are too. This is awesome. The Philadelphia Eagles just took the Super Bowl yesterday. And here we are in Philadelphia, just living it up, talking about industrial organizational psychology and all things change management.
I was so worried that we would have to be embarrassed by all the poles that had, the grease, but they decided not to grease the poles after the Super Bowl. So I didn't
I
have to.
thought people had just kind of worked around it and they were just going for it anyways.
They
Grease, no
decided,
grease, didn't matter.
they said, we're not going to present this challenge. Why make it tempting?
Yeah. They got their snowballs and D-cell batteries ready to go. So
Right on.
So you didn't have to see that as a visitor to
No, I didn't.
our beautiful town.
That's great. I'm so happy. Well, unlike the rest of Philly that's celebrating and going to be dancing in the streets and everything, we're going to be talking a little bit about the opposite, grief, right? So last time we talked about culture, and specifically we were talking about the rituals and the
habits. Yeah.
habits,
that you could use to sort of think about rituals and habits as a way to sustain change, to create that cohesive unit within a team or within a change initiative, and then have that building of rituals maintain that change rhythm and maintain that team cohesion.
right.
Yeah.
And then as we were talking about that, you started to bring up things about the way people feel as we have these changes happen.
Right. And losing what that change will replace sometimes puts us in the stages of grief.
Right. Exactly.
And very often in business, there is no luxury to take time with those stages. And that's what gives rise to the resistance that we have brought up many, many times on our podcast about change management.
Resistance, or just people who may, for a period of time, be just checked out because they're just sad or depressed, or they miss the way things used to be, or they miss their old team if they got moved into a different part of the organization. And
Mm.
I think maybe we could figure out a way to talk about it. But, in my experience, I haven't seen a lot of really good acknowledgement from leaders and managers of companies where I work that it's okay to feel that, and that that folks want you to recognize that those feelings are there, and that you need to process that in order to become your best self in your new environment, your new team, working with your new IT system, working on these new processes, whatever it was. You need to kind of have your moments to get through all that. And
Right.
I haven't seen that done really well in my experience yet. And maybe you guys have.
Well, I've said before, I have had that experience where I've had a supportive, actually, executive, which, when you say that, it sounds like there's no
Anomaly.
possible way he's a unicorn. But no, I mean, the reality is, we looked at that leadership, the full range leadership model. We've talked about that before, right? Where there's transformational leadership here, and there's the
Fair.
laissez-faire and
Transactional.
transactional here. But those people who kind of walk the walk, talk the talk, and have some degree of empathy and are in there in the thick of things with people, I think that those can help people to get through these stages of grief, right? Because grief, I'm going to bring up another theory thing that we talked about, right? We talked about the bridges model. Remember,
Mhm.
does anybody remember that way back?
It's a SHRM question on
It,
the test. I can
oh,
tell you
it
that.
is. Oh, it is.
Oh, is that right? Oh, here you go. It's your SHRM cheat sheet. Yeah,
Well,
people should be pretty we've talked about Bridges' model on a number of our
several times,
episodes.
yeah.
Yeah, but
And
let's review for people
yeah,
who are new to
quick
this
review,
podcast.
right? Yeah. So the first part of this is what's called the ending, right? And that's where things are. The status quo is going away. This is where the grief starts, right? I don't wanna this. Yeah, even if it was broke as hell, excuse my language, but really, if it was really broken,
But
right?
it was comfortable,
But it was comfortable, all right,
familiar.
familiar. There, there's this sense of loss. They move into then from the ending into the neutral zone, right? And the neutral zone is where there's a lot of uncertainty. People want to go back to where it was, but they know they can't go back, and so there's conflicts amongst themselves,
Potential
within
for
themselves.
disengagement.
Absolutely, that's largely where that ends up, right? And then we move into the new beginning, right? So it kind of goes from the lower left side up to the top, and if you look at the lines, they're kind of squiggly because we're
Yes.
squiggly people.
People are messy.
That's right.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's just it's a nice depiction of his approach to how
right,
people go through these stages or the stages that one goes through in a change. Um,
right. But when you have a leader that can empathize and use some degree of that
mhm,
empathy and can still keep people on, there's an art to that, and so I was working for a small association years ago, and this is during COVID, right? So like we talk about change, that was a huge change, right? Um, we had to adapt to working remote. People had not done that for 20 something years. That some of the people that were there have never done that, and they had to learn how to do it.
mhm.
This executive at this organization was very empathetic, allowed people to talk to him individually, right? Which is almost unheard of from somebody that high. But then also allowed everybody to talk in a group and really share, and so it developed some camaraderie, and people felt safe being able to talk about it. And at the same time, once they got it out and said, "Yeah, I feel bad about this," they were able to turn around and more or less heal and start to get involved. So,
That's amazing, and it suggests that maybe that executive had a very high EQ or, emotional intelligence and was very thoughtful in terms of recognizing that this is a huge change,
mhm,
and I'm gonna have to figure out ways to let my people have some space and give them, like, that open door policy for one-on-ones, but I love that that person also created these group sessions where people could just say in that safe group setting, "I'm bummed. I'm confused. I don't get it," whatever they were talking about. And
right,
in that sort of group way, it becomes a very sort of safe way to express these things and then let them go.
sure, sure.
In that sense, do you feel like because that feels a lot like a very psychologically safe environment. Do you feel like there was that psychological safety before in those teams? Did the people feel comfortable talking to each other and sharing personal things with each other? Or was this the first time any of them had experienced that sort of thing?
Uh, I in this particular case, because it was such a small organization that the relationships were fairly well established.
Okay. So that
You
may have
know,
helped a lot.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it does kind of show like the immediate. So I think the whole organization was like 20 something people, right? But the in office staff was typically around 10 to 12 on any given day, which is kind of interesting because effective work groups, they say, are between 8 and 12 people, and so this whole organization acting as this diverse little microcosm of what we kind of want as a good environment, a psychologically safe environment, was set up just by the nature of how it was, just all people. At
Right.
some point.
Right. And that speaks volumes about that manager. And that manager was a leader to do that,
Yeah.
right? And you are reminding me of, we were talking about management styles and leadership styles. And I do believe that we talk so much about good leaders raise their people up and give credit to their team. We
Mhm.
rarely talk about how good leaders also not just raise their team up in times of success, but support them in times of uncertainty and
Mm.
fear and grief
Stress.
or
Yeah.
mourning. So that ties back to leadership styles. And I think that most of the leaders that I can remember at different points of extreme change in my career were more like a manager with that mentality of, we just have to get this done.
Right. Like
And I
task
think
oriented.
that difference between leadership and managers became murky. And that we need to take a break. I can see you're about to suggest it, Ben. This is a lot of information. See how being together, I already know that Rich wants to take a break because we're sitting next to each other.
You're channeling Rich's inner
Yeah. Yeah.
Clark. I
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, let's do. That's just
Oh,
a fantastic idea, Cheryl.
I love it.
We'll
So
take a
glad
break. We'll be right
that
back.
we thought of it.
Dysfunctional organizational cultures and poorly managed transformations can devastate employee morale and motivation, leading to disengaged employees, poor work quality, and the loss of your best people. The impacts to your organization include high costs, low productivity, and wasted resources. At Harmonious Workplaces, our purpose is to help you build the best workplace possible. We are advisors applying proven organizational development and industrial organizational psychology methodologies to help you become your best organization. We are doers, using time-tested principles to help you execute organizational change initiatives smoothly and successfully. To discover how harmonious workplaces can impact your organization, visit www.harmoniousworkplaces.com and book a free 30-minute information session with one of our consultants today. Again, that's www.harmoniousworkplaces.com.
And we're back. So we've been talking about grief and processing grief in the workplace. And that's just it. Like so going back and focusing this on the workplace, but, uh, people have to process grief in lots of different scenarios, right? So there are some models for this. Um,
Yeah.
you brought up a couple of these here, in
Yeah,
our show notes.
we put a few in the show notes, and maybe those are just starting points, but I think we'll go through them. But the common theme seems to just be that there's some kind of process that people have to go through, and the important thing is that leaders need to recognize that this is a process. Different people will go through it in different ways, But
Right.
to shortchange that or to pretend that it doesn't exist and just bully through your change is generally going to be a recipe for not happy people or not very well people until they go through it on their own time. And that could just take exponentially longer than if you just let them kind of do their thing. Like Rich was saying in the prior part of the show, people had a chance to come together, they could share their feelings, and then it just settled, and then they could move on. If you don't
Sure.
give them that space, I think it just backs everything up. It doesn't go and it's like just gonna be a mess.
Yep.
Right.
So, we all know, or at least everyone else on this podcast knows about Kubler-Ross, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross,
The
and
world among us. Yes.
yeah, the
Yeah.
2 of you, basically.
It's
Uh,
a group.
yeah,
Right.
Kubler-Ross, 5 stages of grief. You had denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
Yeah.
And these are not necessarily linear. You can go in between and you can progress and regress and things like that. These are maybe the most well-known approach to how people process grief. One of the criticisms that I've heard about this model or this theory is that it suggests that there's this endpoint of acceptance. And I'm not sure that that's the right word in this day and age where you may not ever accept the loss of a loved one or the death of someone that you cared for, or the loss of your childhood or whatever. It
Sure.
may be that you sort of come to be at peace with it in a little bit of a different way, but that doesn't mean you're necessarily accepting of it. And maybe that's a real subtle kind of a difference. Anyways,
Applying to business, mergers and acquisitions, a buyout, uh, any of those business examples of an extreme,
yeah.
profound
Oh,
celebration
sure.
acceptance, you kept your position at the new entity, but you may not ever ascribe to the values of the previous company that came in. Or, but you're right, but you do move on and you do accept the current situation. So,
Yeah.
point
Yeah, and it just that grief may never end in that sense. Like you maybe in the criticism is meant to say that you accept the new situation, but your grief does not end. And then maybe people are looking at this like, oh, if I go through these 5 stages and just get myself to that dang acceptance, I'm gonna be happy again and my grief will be over. And I don't think that's what this is meant to try to convey.
great point.
So a couple of other models that are out there. There's something called the dual process model by Strobe and Schutt that suggests people oscillate between a loss-oriented coping mechanism and a restoration-oriented coping mechanism.
Hmm.
And you're sort of bouncing essentially between I've lost something and I'm trying to move forward, and I've lost something and I'm trying to move forward, and kind of bouncing back and forth. That
Sure.
seems sorry, Rich?
No, no, I'm just acknowledging you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
That
see that.
seems similar to how people can bounce through Kubler-Ross's. You know,
Right.
you're not gonna go you're not necessarily gonna go through just a straight line path to happy. It's gonna be lumpy and you're gonna have setbacks and things like that. Another one called the continuing bonds theory from Klaus, Silverman, and Nickman maintains a relationship with the prior ways of working, or if you're talking about someone who passed away, a prior loved one, but in a new way. So you figure out a new way to relate to that past. And it seems like maybe that's another way to say acceptance, or another way to say coming to terms with, or coming to a peaceful state with whatever it was, and
Sure.
realizing that prior in a new sort of way with your current. Seems like these are starting to become very thematic, right? And so
Yeah. Right.
Niemeyer had a meaning reconstruction model that really focuses on this idea of redefining meaning so that grief is a process of making sense of the loss, reconstructing one's identity in response to it. That to me sounds a lot like the continuing bonds theory that we just talked about.
Yeah.
So all of these I think are I'm not going to do it justice to the field, but they feel like at a very 50,000-foot level, they're all similar ways of saying the same kinds of things. People will go through some kind of process depending upon who they are and how they grieve and their cultural background and their prior experiences with other grief, and that this idea that you will eventually progress through the grief but it's not going to be linear and it's not going to be the same way for everyone. There's no right one way to do it,
Right.
but they all imply that there's some sort of thing that needs to happen, a process, and that you do need to allow time for that, and you should allow time for that.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. I like take yeah, I don't know if I would ever take like a single model here, and try to apply it to anything.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, in the same way that most I don't know, maybe it's not the same for you guys in org development, but in change management and in a lot of the strategic work I've done and project management work I've done, there's frameworks and an overarching theme, but
sure.
I've never done the same exact thing twice to where I could just take that cookie cutter, stamp out the cookie, and have it.
Right.
It's always tailoring bits and pieces and figuring out what this situation needs from your
Right.
toolbox.
Sure.
And so
There's the
maybe it's the
situation,
same.
but isn't there also, to some extent, isn't also the individual? Like there's some degree of individualization that needs to happen
Yeah,
to allow people, because process whatever it is,
for
right?
sure. For sure.
Sure.
And I think that's maybe, to go back to Rich, your example of the executive who did it quite well, that person seemed to recognize that each individual may have needed something different. The group needed something together in those sessions to process grief and heal, but maybe each individual did it in his or her own way, and that's where, having that open door policy was great, and just recognizing that just recognizing that this was a significant change is probably more than a lot of other, executives may have ever done.
Yeah, I think that I think there's a lot to be said for just at least the acknowledgement part. It's just often
Mhm.
excluded from the equation.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we've talked about different types of cultures, learning culture, change culture. Those cultures, because that is a goal of any leader to have those things existing in that culture, that would make it easier to expect that kind of time or that kind of nurturing or that kind of respect in those environments.
Sure.
In cultures where those things are not part of the value system, those things are not part of the habits or the rituals, then you're less likely to have those things. And if those are important to you to feel like you have agency, self-efficacy, and psychological safety, then you're gonna have a tough time in that environment.
Hmm.
Mhm.
It happens. It happens all the time.
Sure. Unfortunately,
Yeah. Yeah.
as much as I've been in, that organization, a couple other ones that have had an empathetic leader, by and large, you're right. I mean, we have a job to do. We have to get this done. There's no real acknowledgement of how people are going to accept it or whatever. They just expect that you're going to accept, you know, uh, and that's, it's less old school and more, just out of date,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, should we take another break?
Let's take another break
Come
and,
back and
yeah,
regroup?
let's do that.
Great.
We'll be
Mourn
back.
we can mourn the first 2 segments of this podcast.
Oh, I don't know. I hope we celebrate it.
There will be a celebration.
Celebration can be a form of processing your
That's,
grief.
yes. Cool.
We'll be back.
There.
At Harmonious Workplaces, we believe work should provide purpose, satisfaction, and growth. We empower people to thrive by fostering environments where individuals can find meaning in their work and organizations can succeed through thoughtful, well-executed strategies. We're committed to making work better for the people who do it and the leaders who guide them. To discover how Harmonious Workplaces can impact your organization, visit www.harmoniousworkplaces.com and book a free 30-minute information session with one of our consultants today. Again, that's www.harmoniousworkplaces.com.
And we're back. So we've been talking about the grief process, and we just went through some models of grief that people use and all kinds of situations, right? But we're
Mhm.
really putting this into focus in the workplace, and you know we can't ignore this aspect of diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI), right? And I think that might be our first acronym for the day. As much
It
as
would be shocking, but I
I
think you're
think you're
right.
Oh
right.
my gosh.
Yes, that's right. So, but we've seen in very, very recent past, like, and actually, I can't even say the past, like it's happening now, right? Where companies are rolling that back, right? So they had these DEI initiatives and whole DEI departments, and people with those titles, right? And now we have Walmart, Harley Davidson, Ford, and the list goes on, that where they have removed, right? Our own government has removed that from different parts of the organization, right? And so people are left, and I've seen quite a few people, particularly within the industrial organizational psychology realm, right? Who some of them were part of these departments, who are now unsure of their place in the organization. And of course, with this huge change, it's very abrupt, right?
And
It's very abrupt.
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
and when it's that abrupt without much explanation, it feels maybe invalidating to a lot of those folks,
Right.
and that can be really hard too.
Sure.
And to be fair, not every big company has rolled things back or completely pivoted on that. There's still a number that are very much full-throated supporters of DEI because
Sure.
at the end of the day, I think it helps bring better perspectives in a more thoughtful way, and those companies, I think, at the end of the day, will wind up doing better. But,
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
that's
and
what Alex was just telling us a week or 2 ago, is that diversity is like fuel for your innovation engine,
that's right.
and
Yep.
it keeps you out of groupthink.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Well,
So this is a fascinating experiment that our country is going through right now, and in 2 years or 10 years, when people look back on this, it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out.
but I think it's going to be how the management, the leadership, and the management, right? So the managers being the people that we report to, but the leadership that could come from any part of the organization, right? Um, how well they allow people to be able to process this change that's impacting them in a profound way, right? Um,
Right.
Eh Go ahead, Sharon.
And as it is being eliminated because of this idea that it is in fact a form of bias, let's hope that there are enough leaders and managers and corporate cultures and organizations of any size that understand the humanity behind those values and those principles are allowed to remain within any organization.
right. Yeah.
And that includes helping people understand why were these values instituted and then stripped out in such a rapid turnaround. If you look at the grand scheme of history, they're very recent, these initiatives and these ideas and these values.
Yeah.
And the companies that embraced them wove them deeply into their mission, their vision statements, all their vision and values. And for them to be stripped out so quickly, it I think can only weaken an organization when it's that fast. And all the things we've been talking about on this episode is that people need time to adjust to change on a profound level that makes them feel like they are grieving. And the pace of these changes, no matter how you feel about them being there or not being there, the abruptness and the pace and the way that this is being managed has to be causing grief,
Right.
even if your department
Mhm.
isn't the one that has been
Right.
eliminated.
Right.
Well, that makes me think of one of the things we talked about last week or in the last episode, right? Where we talked about effective change happens when um, we're intentional, right? We're purposeful in what we're doing. When we have good
Antidote.
habits, right?
Good
We have good habits, right? So that's as Napoleon Hill put it, the law of hypnotic rhythm, right? But we have these good habits, and then we have time, right? And you hit on that. Like the time part is what is crucial, and we're unfortunately right now not giving people time to be able to process and get through this. We're just like, okay, it's done. Deal with it. You know.
And that's
And
that and just the time element alone for anything, when you go through that whiplash. I
the
mean,
whip,
let's just say it's moving from Apple computers to Windows PCs, and then you go back to Apple. I mean, that whiplash is just gonna drive people absolutely out of their mind.
Yep.
And so now imagine something that people really take to heart on one side or another, or maybe in the middle, something like DEI, that sense of not having any idea which end is up anymore is just gonna be so much more magnified.
yeah.
Sure.
And you're both reminding me of other episodes where we've talked about effective change. And we always say first and foremost, why? And there appears to be a profound lack of why
Mm.
to this too.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. And there's that whole. I mean, that's kind of the intentionality part, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there
Well, people aren't
seems
clear on that intention. That's
Yeah. And
stinks.
even if the people who are initiating this abrupt and profound change, their articulation is leaving a lot of questions.
I was gonna say, what I thought you were gonna say is it always comes back to communication, and you're absolutely right, why is super critical, and I think the communication in this instance has been sorely lacking, and s that just makes the whole thing that much more challenging because there are probably many people who can't wrap their minds around it because they're not given any hook. There's no story, there's no rational reasons given, there's, like, nothing given. It's just hard, and so people start to make stuff up, but then they go into the churn and the spin, and they get lost. So
Right.
these are great examples of how not maybe to do a change.
Right. And a leader that doesn't take these aspects into consideration when they initiate a change are often left with little other alternative than to be the bully.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, people are gonna be questioning what's going on, and they're gonna be told, "You stay and you buy into it, or you can leave, or we'll fire you," and then they just essentially just start whipping the horses more to make them go faster, and that's not a great way to build a nice, healthy culture.
Yep. Well, to wrap things, because we're all pretty close at the wrapping up part. If I could just say, I'm here in the land of brotherly love, right? And we are talking about, right? Just being a little more caring, right? And a
Yeah.
little more, so people like Philadelphia in some ways.
Yeah. And we just
Right?
witnessed the pinnacle of teamwork. It's the winners of the Super Bowl.
There you go.
The Super Bowl.
With the brotherly shove that I just learned about.
Oh, I didn't even know about that. It took someone to come from Chicago to tell me about brotherly shove.
That's the signature play. But, yeah, I mean, I We have to
Oh,
let people just process and grieve and be
Hmm.
authentically them, right? I think that's really what it comes down to.
And Sherry, you look like you're going to say something.
if the brotherly shove happened during the Super Bowl, then I guess I have to admit I must have known about it.
Oh,
Is that what you're talking about? I suppose it was a football
it
term.
was a football
I
term.
thought it was.
Yes.
I thought it's what happens when you're trying to walk down the street or catch a cab.
Oh no, the just on the brotherly shove is where the entire line um pushes the quarterback over the top over the front line
Oh,
to gain
so
yardage.
it's not just on the sidewalks,
It's not just on the sidewalks. No,
in
this
on the
is
subway or the
right.
bus.
They call it like the other word was the tush push.
See? Oh, oh,
They push
we're learning all kinds
they
of things.
push him over.
Or
You know,
through.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's yeah, it was remarkably effective.
and you learned about those on your Uber from the
I
airport,
only learned about no, I learned about that yesterday watching the Super Bowl.
There you go.
But
which I claim to have
but
watched.
helping
But
hands. You know.
so back
Uh,
to
uh,
brotherly love.
Anyway, yes.
It's a poignant tie-in to everything we talked about.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I'm speechless.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end it.
Yeah. All right. Wow.
When you got
With that,
nothing else to say. There's always one more thing to say.
and that is
Thank you, everyone, for listening and tuning in to Harmonious Workplaces podcast. Make change your friend.
And tell your friends about our podcast.
Thanks for listening to Harmonious Workplaces. You can find Harmonious Workplaces on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and other streaming platforms. We'd love any feedback on whatever channel you find us on. Please rate, like, and share our podcast with your network, and remember to add Harmonious Workplaces to your list of favorites to get notified about each new episode. To contact Rich or Cheryl, please visit www.workbalanceconsulting.com. To connect with Ben, find him on LinkedIn or visit at www.harborsidestrategy.com.